Well, welcome everyone to NAMI at Noon. I'm Amy Brundle. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at NAMI North Carolina. And as always, we're really pleased to welcome everyone to today's webinar. First of all, of course, we'd like to thank Bristol Myers Squibb and the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Use Services for their support of today's webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If you've been with us before, you know this, but feel free to put any questions you may have for our speaker down in the Q&A section below, or you can use the chat function, and we may be interrupting the conversation as it flows to take some of those questions as we go along the way. Also, I'll be providing a recording of today's session and any additional materials that we have to provide for you, probably by close of business tomorrow on Friday. So keep an eye out for that. Even those who registered everyone who registered will receive a copy of this video. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Leah Stiles. Leah is a retired Navy senior chief, a national speaker, nonprofit founder, and best-selling author of Battle Scars and Body Wars, a personal and professional journey shining a light on eating disorders in the military. She had a 20-year military career and afterwards has transformed her lived experience into a mission for change, founding Sea Waves, the nation's first and only nonprofit organization exclusively dedicated to addressing eating disorders within the military community. Through her work, she educates military leaders, healthcare providers, advocates, and communities on the often overlooked intersection of eating disorders, mental health, military culture, and suicide prevention. She's known for her candid storytelling, practical insights, and unwavering commitment to reducing stigma. Leah will challenge the audience today to recognize eating disorders not simply as issues of food or weight, but as serious mental illnesses that deserve early intervention, compassionate support, and accessible care. So welcome, Leah. We're excited to hear from you today.
Hi, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, as we start this discussion, obviously your bio states that you transformed your lived experience into the advocacy work that you're doing now. So, could you tell us a little bit about your personal journey and why this topic resonates with you so much?
Sure, absolutely. So, as I said, I served active duty in the Navy for 20 years. I also was a Navy spouse during that whole time, 20 years. And now I'm a Navy mom. My son is active duty. So, kind of those different hats of service. And I did all of that the entire time with an eating disorder for almost 30 years. So I really navigated service through these different hats, myself, spouse, mom, um, with kind of that lens of already being eating disorder aware and aware of all the things that kind of tie into it. So I recognized a lot of the gaps all the way along from, you know, the stigma, the taboo, the lack of kind of current knowledge, and there's a lot of misunderstanding. And so I always kind of wished that somebody else would form a nonprofit or have a place where we could get answers, support, resources. And it took me a little while to figure out that that was supposed to be me.
Hmm. Excellent. And so we'll definitely talk more about your nonprofit and the services it provides. But first, I want to kind of take us back a little bit and get into the different types of disordered eating and what symptoms may accompany them for anybody in our audience who might not be as familiar as you are.
Yeah, so the DSM, so the Diagnostic Criteria Manual, lists technically six, and then there's kind of like some subcategories under each one. But to kind of give like that high level overview, you're not gonna walk away a eating disorder professional through the high level things. But a lot of people, when you talk about eating disorders, they kind of recognize anorexia, right? We saw anorexia a lot on the Lifetime channel, on the talk show host. However, when people picture anorexia, a lot of times we hear that they kind of picture somebody in a really small body or frail, tiny, when the data actually tells us less than 6% of people with an eating disorder fall into the medically underweight category. So we want to
Mm.
challenge some of these ideas. So what it's called when you have all of the same behaviors and symptoms, such as fear of weight gain, restricting food, sometimes, compensating for food outside of purging. That's another one we'll get to. If you meet all that other criteria, but you're not in the medically underweight category, this is called atypical anorexia, which is actually if less than 6% of people are underweight, more of people would be atypical. So in the eating disorder field, some of us believe that that should be the typical and the other should be atypical, but it's a little backwards. So we can see how it could be confusing. And then there's bulimia. Some people have heard of bulimia, and this is really boils down to binging, yeah, binge episodes, intaking large amounts of food, and then different ways of compensating for that food. So whether it's purging, laxative misuse, exercise misuse, or over exercising. So when we're talking about the military and veteran community, that one's kind of difficult to recognize because there's really nobody in the military community that's going to say, "Hey, do you think you've been at the gym a little too much lately? Or do you think you've been, running a little too much lately?" It kind of just doesn't come up as a red flag, especially in that culture. There's binge eating disorder. And one big myth around this one, people see the binge eating and they think that that is, the highlight of the problem, but the data will tell you that binge eating actually stems from some kind of restriction, so much like anorexia. So whether it's an actual restriction of food, like where you don't allow yourself a certain food group or to eat after a certain time, you put some kind of restriction around your food, or like more of a like a mental restriction of like I didn't earn that dessert, or
Mm.
that's so bad. I can't have that for one reason or another, whether it's actual literal restriction or the mental part of it. That's really where the binge eating disorder kind of stems from. And then there's ARFID. The difference with ARFID is that this is the one diagnosis that isn't actually tied to a desire to be in a smaller body. This is tied to difficulties around food for non-weight reasons. So whether this is a texture that we avoid, or the fear of choking when you're eating, or other fears that could prevent you from, eating a variety of foods, other than weight loss. And we see this a lot in the neurodivergent community, a lot with autism, where it's just really difficult to get a variety of foods in for reasons other than weight loss. And then, like I said, there's other subcategories in each of these. If you look at like OSFED and EDNOS, these are like other specified eating disorders or eating disorder not otherwise specified. And I kind of look at these as kind of an umbrella. So for me, in my lived experience, I really struggled with restriction. That would be under the anorexia subtitle. However, I was one of those less than 6% people that didn't fall into the medically underweight category. So before they added atypical anorexia underneath OSFED, I didn't qualify for an actual diagnosis. Now, on the flip side, well, as an adult, as a child, I did. On the flip side, I also struggled with purging. I had a purging addiction and I was purging, multiple times a day for decades. However, since I hadn't experienced a binge episode, and that's a requirement for diagnostic criteria under bulimia, I didn't qualify for a bulimia diagnosis. And so although I was struggling between those two behaviors back and forth, there wasn't one diagnosis for me. So it was a really big deal when the DSM got updated and added in the OSFED, and that is kind of more of an umbrella because it's really common to kind of shift from different behaviors under each one back and forth.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned kind of how, these categories have had to change some because the original categories may have been too restrictive for people who were falling through the cracks, which meant that you weren't getting the recognition and the treatment that you deserved to get because of that. So that is an interesting added layer to this that's not really often considered.
Right. And so speaking of falling through the cracks, we've seen pretty consistently that it was hard for even providers to really recognize and understand that you could be severely struggling with an eating disorder and still be in a larger body. So that's
Hmm.
really a myth to think that you can look at somebody and tell how much they're struggling. You really can't. You need to do the labs and all those things. And so even just very recently, if we have any providers, we know how common it is to get the DSM updated. But here, just recently, they're removing BMI as part of the diagnostic criteria because that's thrown off so many providers from giving a diagnosis. And it's again also BMI is also kind of a myth that it is so closely tied to health. We've kind of gone down that rabbit hole, and research and data tells us now that that's not the direct answer, whereas the media and all these other things have closely tied it to health.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of getting a bit more specific, and you touched on this a little bit, but what are some of the ways that these disorders can specifically manifest themselves in a military or veteran community?
Yeah, well, the numbers tell us that the active duty veterans and family members, our rates of eating disorders are about 3 times higher than our civilian counterparts.
Wow.
And so we look back at like the culture. Active duty is one of the few career fields where your weight is monitored and is connected to your success. We have athletes, right? Wrestlers and people like that, where their weight is and their size of their body is directly impacted by their career field. But other than that, there aren't a lot of other jobs where that is a main factor. And sometimes in the first responder community. So, in the military community, half a pound or half an inch over could prevent you from promoting, from getting the orders that you want, eventually could prevent you from serving at all. So what we see is a lot of disordered behavior. So there's difference between the disordered behavior and the eating disorder. Again, kind of on that spectrum, and people can move, all along
Mhm.
there. But we've normalized a lot of disordered behavior that people do right before the weigh-ins. So different branches weigh in kind of differently, but on average, it's mandatory at least once a year. Most branches are twice a year. And this is, and again, a little bit different per branch, but either you meet the height weight standard and or a body tape measurement with measuring tape, that is very accurate. And there's a lot of human error in that. It's not like a big machine bod pod that can really measure. There's a lot of human error. So people do things to make sure they're on the safe side because you don't want that in your record, that you're over for a whole bunch of reasons, but some of the career, implications that we talked about. So people will, kind of crash diet or, any kind of diet. They abuse laxatives. At any given time, you can go to a military base and somebody is either wrapped in saran wrap or trash bags and sweating it out, running it out, all these things. And we've really normalized these over the decades,
Hmm.
and it it's still disordered.
Right. Yeah. So, can you tell us a little bit? Of course, the height weight qualifications is a huge part of that. But can you tell us some other ways that military culture in general could potentially exacerbate an eating disorder or make it more necessary to conceal it?
Yeah, so there's now an executive order that says that eating disorders are non-compatible with military service. And the problem with that is that there's no other standard operating procedure given following that. So commanding officers don't really know what that means. Does that mean if they're diagnosed right away? they have to be processed out. When a service member is, struggling with alcohol related incidents or alcoholism, we have a process. They get 3 attempts at treatment. If after that third time we might have to have a talk that maybe military service isn't for you or you're not for military service, but we don't have that kind of standard operating procedure for eating disorders. So it leaves a lot of ambiguous information, which is difficult. So people just kind of tend to not want to, get that in the record or be diagnosed with it. So this creates kind of a gap. We're not going to have less people in the military with an eating disorder. We're just going to have less people seeking treatment, which is far more dangerous.
Right.
And then, the military's come a really long way in talking about mental health and ma making it safe to kind of like seek treatment. But I would say that eating disorders are kind of a decade or two still behind that like progress. And so then you also look at the lifestyle of the military culture. We move a lot. We leave not only our support systems, but our primary care physicians, all of our doctors, we, move to a different area. We're gone a lot, missing our family and, different coping mechanisms. We know in the military that drugs are not, there's zero tolerance for drugs. We provide information about using alcohol safely, but we don't talk about food or exercise and how that becomes a coping mechanism and throw in some trauma and oftentimes even military sexual trauma. 1 in 3 people suffer from that. That now we're like really creating this terrible storm along with not having a lot of educated or certified providers or educated leaders to recognize this, and then also normalizing some of the behaviors that should be red flags. And it really camouflages, if you will, the dangers that are happening.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned just the frequency of moving. My father was a Marine, and through my entire childhood, and the instability of having to completely relocate your life every couple of years takes a toll. And I think that's a part of it that it doesn't get talked about enough, is that you're leaving your support system that you just built and having to build it again.
Yes, your personal support system, your medical support system, kind of all those things that would play a part. And where if you were kind of tipsy on like that disordered eating disorder, these factors can kind of push, either way. And then, a really prime time, two big things can really play a major factor in developing an eating disorder. The first is that the intentional pursuit of weight loss. Most people that are trying to lose weight for a diet for one reason or another, not that that automatically means you develop an eating disorder. The opposite is true, though. Many that have developed an eating disorder it started by intentional weight loss. And then we see that there's a prime time. Now, let's be clear. Eating disorders can impact any age, male or female, any background, anything. And at that prime time of 18 to 21, when people are leaving home, many civilians are going to college. Also, many young people choose the military route. So, frontal lobe isn't completely developed. Our coping
Mhm.
mechanisms are completely developed. Our support system isn't completely developed. And we know that we can't do drugs or, abuse alcohol. This kind of creates, again, that dangerous storm there.
Hmm. Absolutely. So, we've touched on this a little bit, but what about the impacts of stigma? Are service members or veterans less likely to seek out or receive treatment for this?
Absolutely. Like I said, mental health in general, right? And we've come a long way. So I had just finished boot camp when 9/11 happened.
Ooh.
And so I feel like 9/11 gave us that opportunity to learn more about PTSD. We started learning that it's not only the generations before us. It's not only combat. There's other things, right? And so I feel like we've done such a good job of recognizing that in each other, getting people to resources. It became less taboo. We were able to kind of talk through it. I thought that eating disorders would be like kind of right behind PTSD in that conversation. And I don't think that we're getting there. There's still, again, a lot of misinformation around what it looks like, that you'd have to be in a small, tiny, frail body, that just a whole bunch of myths. It would be great if the people on tuned in here put some myths in the chat that maybe you heard. I love doing myth busting, or maybe that you've been wondering about, because that's kind of what we have to break through for this stigma and taboo, is like break through some of those things that, again, don't the Lifetime channel maybe didn't show.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to put that request in the chat, and please, anybody who's heard a myth about eating disorders, let's combat those one at a time.
Yeah.
Um, so speaking of kind of getting treatment, I just want to ask, what led you personally to kind of get to that final point where you're like, okay, this is not this is not, normal behavior. This is not typical behavior. I need to go seek treatment. Regardless of the stigma or the cost, I need to go take care of this.
Well, unfortunately, a major part of eating disorders, we talked about like kind of that stigma and secrecy.
Hmm.
And there's also this kind of inherent factor of I'm not really sick. I'm not sick enough, or especially if I'm not in that underweight category, like do I really need help? So, my eating disorder became a major medical issue twice in my career. The first was at my 10-year point, right at that halfway point, and I ruptured my esophagus from purging so much. The acid ruptured. And I was kind of relieved because I heard that the commanding officer knew about it and that he wanted to see me when I got back from the hospital. And I had worked for him for 3 years, and I just really thought, like, on one hand, I felt terrible because I was like, well, there's no denying it now. And then I was like, but if there's anybody that can get me help, like, I know it's this guy. Unfortunately, he did not know anything about eating disorders, and he kind of looked at it as a disciplinary issue. He wanted to process me out of the military for destruction of government property, my esophagus. So I had to fight to stay in. I went to legal, and I did. I got to stay in, but I kind of learned that I had to keep my eating disorder even more of a secret if I wanted to be able to complete my career, which I was all in for. At that point, I was already a chief petty officer in E7, and I was like, I got to keep going. I love this. I loved what I was doing. So it was another 7 years until a military leader uh, really called me out on my behaviors. He was a former corpsman, so he was medical, and he had a loved one that had an active eating disorder. And so he was really able to recognize not only like my behaviors socially, but also medically. And I needed his permission to go to the ship, my dream ship that I wanted to be on. And I had planned for quite a while. And he was the deciding factor, and my record had the ruptured esophagus. And so he could have medically denied me to be on the ship for that. But I kind of negotiated with him, and he said, okay, if there's no purging on my ship, I'm going to do your labs every few weeks. When I say we eat a meal together, we eat a meal together. And I was like, okay, all right, I'll do it. And I meant it. I was like, okay, I'll do it because I wanted to be on there so bad. That worked okay while we were not deployed very much. When the ship
Hmm.
leaves the pier and goes out a lot more, because my answer in my disordered brain to not purging on the ship was not eating on the ship. That doesn't
Mm,
last that long. So I didn't even make it halfway through the full deployment, so probably 3+ months of deployment in the Middle East when him and the XO and the CO were like, you're just medically compromised. Like you need to be inpatient or residential. And I got medevaced off the ship and back to the States to go for a higher level of care at that time.
mm. Yeah. Wow. So these kind of disorders can last decades,
Yeah, if
especially if
not
it's left
unchecked.
untreated.
Hmm.
Yeah. So if a service member or veteran is living with a disorder like this, now you've said that Sea Waves is the first and only nonprofit exclusively dedicated to this topic. So I'd love to hear more about the kind of work that Sea Waves is doing and also some additional resources that the military can send to their members that might be dealing with this kind of issue.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't realize that C-Waves is a whole acronym, and so each letter stands for what we do. And I developed it this way to kind of fill the gaps that I recognized. So first and foremost, the S is support. So we connect the military community, active duty veterans, family members, whether you served before 9/11 or after, and regardless of your discharge status, because we know that some people got other than honorable, and it wasn't always disciplinary like in I almost faced, right? A lot of times it was mental health. So we connect the military community at no cost to them to eating disorder support and resources. Anyone, we meet you where you are, and it's confidential. So whether you just want a podcast or a book, or you need help getting into inpatient or a higher level of care, we meet you where you are. The E is for education. We have a wonderful education team. It's the Military Eating Disorder Awareness and Literacy. And this is 2 hours, NADAC accredited, CE credits training. Pretty much teaching the military community about eating disorders and the eating disorder and mental health community about the military.
Hmm.
Um, the A is awareness, and just we, have an amazing marketing team, and we do awareness campaigns, and we go to a bunch of the resource fairs and conferences and speaking engagements, wrote the book about it, just to really get the awareness out there. The W is wellness. So sometimes people come to us and they don't necessarily want an eating disorder therapist. They might want uh, equine therapy or to hear about retreats. And so we just connect them with that whole health, whole body, any kind of wellness resources that they're looking for. And we hold wellness resource fairs as often as we can, or show up to them and booth at them as often as we can. The A is advocacy. Unfortunately, the military medical insurance TRICARE historically doesn't pay for inpatient or residential treatment for eating disorders if you're over the age of 21, which we talked about. Eating disorders don't stop on our 21st birthday. And so we do a lot of advocacy around getting systematic issues like that fixed. And we did get a law placed, working with a bunch of other amazing advocates. It got placed in the law, but it hasn't been implemented yet. So more advocacy around that. The V is validation. So much of what we've been struggling with advocacy goes back to where's the data, where's the statistics. So we do a lot of work with researchers, academics, people that are doing their part to get more and more data around eating disorders in the military community. Of course, the E is eating disorders and disordered eating. We know that there's no standard screening on the military side. In fact, on the active duty side, there are no certified eating disorder specialists. And on the VA side, there's only 4 in the nation. So we know that you may not have a diagnosis, and that doesn't mean that you don't deserve support and care. If you're struggling with your relationship with your body or with food, You deserve support. So that kind of covers both. And then the last is super important is the suicide prevention piece. We see it all the time. People are talking about 22 a day, and we've done the whole push-up thing on social media. We've done the whole thing, which that number is actually between 42 and 44 a day. But we're finding that all these programs for military suicide prevention, they're not acknowledging that about one third of those veterans, 30%, are struggling with a mental health issue that we're not talking about. We're not getting resources for. It's hard to access treatment for. So it's so important. And the number one cause of death for somebody with an eating disorder is suicide. So it's so
Hmm.
important in these suicide prevention conversations that we're we're acknowledging that elephant in the room. Eating disorders are real and they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, do you know of other resources outside of the work that you all are doing that you've referred to your friends in the military community?
Yes, yes. So first of all, the National Alliance for Eating Disorders is amazing, and they take phone calls and they have free virtual support groups. They also have in-person support groups. And I know that this is the North Carolina area. You guys have an amazing resource. The Carolina Resource Center for Eating Disorders, they're coming up
Hmm.
on celebrating their 20 years, and they're having a really awesome their 18th annual HEAL conference is in Asheville, North Carolina, October 1st and 2nd, and they do amazing at supporting the North Carolina area. So if you want to kind of even ever check that out, that is a great resource that you have in your area, and I can put that in the chat too with that link. Oh, and you got it there. I put the
Yep.
event in there too because they are wonderful and we work with them as well.
Yeah, and I'm gonna stick the Sea Waves website in there so that people have that information as well. Because these resources are amazing, but there's also, again, not enough specifically for the military community. And so the work that you all are doing to kind of bring this important topic to this special community is incredible and much needed. And there should be a ton more of you, but we appreciate what you guys are doing.
I dropped another link in there that makes it
Oh,
easy
great.
for everybody to find our socials, our newsletter, my book, anything else that you're looking for. That one has all of it as well. Almost too many. That's why I don't always add that one. It's got all of them.
So, I want to make sure that we've got time for any questions that the audience may have for you, but kind of where I want to go next is discussing what you wish your family or your friends had kind of known while you were going through your journey, and then also what family members, friends, and providers should specifically kind of know about the intersection between military culture and disordered eating so that they can be as supportive as possible to somebody going through this. I think I accidentally froze. So let's try that again. We're looking for what family members, friends, and providers can know about the situation so that they can be as supportive as possible, and what you wish your support system had known while you were going through the journey.
Sure. So we talked about how like eating disorders kind of inherently have that like I'm not sick enough or that secretiveness around it. And I look back at my 30 years of struggling with an eating disorder. And at different times, I was more willing to have feedback than others. So really just building that relationship and having like a safe place, making sure that you make it clear that you're a safe person to talk about or talk with. Because half the time I was hiding, I was manipulating, I was secretive. But on the other hand, on the other half of the time, I was kind of hoping that people would ask me just one more question. If I
Hmm.
said I'm intermittent fasting, You might have assumed 8 hours, but there was a point that I was just really hoping somebody would ask me because my answer at some point was 8 days. And if somebody would have just asked me, I know at that point I would have told them. And so, that's kind of like, family or friend side, but also then providers, or if you work at a mental health, or if you're, already kind of in this space, just as simply as you ask, are you struggling with sleep? Simply add asking, are you struggling with your relationship with food or body? And let's normalize just asking that, right? And so obviously if this is like a cold question just straight up front, you're not going to get, the most warm answer right away. And if we normalize just making that a part of our check-in of how people are doing, are you struggling with your relationship with food or body? I think that it opens the door to at least let people know that this is a place that they can come have more of that conversation.
Hmm. And then here's one kind of branching off from that topic. What do you think needs to kind of happen in the military to make this topic less taboo and make it easier for service members to get treatment?
Well, part of the CERB Act that got placed into law makes it mandatory for military leadership to have education. Again, we don't all have to be doctors after this, but we gotta have just enough, conversation around making it conversationable. I think that's really going to help. We need to get a standard screening in our physical health exam, either yearly or at least through behavioral health. Most eating disorder screenings are only around 6 questions. Super easy to add that in. And we need to get some more prevention right in here. So when people, go through boot camp or go through their first school, or maybe in the academies and the leadership academies, we need to let people know, hey, yes, you're going to get weighed publicly. Yes, you have to meet military standards. We're always going to have military standards. They may change, but we're always going to have them, and we need to have them. We don't want to not have standards. And the way we meet these standards is super important because we've talked a
Hmm.
lot about the mental health side of this. Obviously, it's NAMI, right? And on the readiness side of this, if people are doing things to shrink their body to meet these standards, it's making us not be ready warfighters. These things cause delayed decision making, brain fog, delayed recovery after injury, all the things we need that our service members in tip-top shape. So it's kind of a, juxtaposition here that if you're having to do these things to shrink your body, but we're not monitoring or being careful about how we're doing it, we're still not going to have a strong, ready war fighter. And
Right.
if our war fighters have a spouse or a child that's struggling with an eating disorder and we can't get them care, their head is not going to be in the game either. They're not going to be focused on the mission.
Right. Yeah, and you hate to say that that's the angle that you're coming at your advocacy with, but sometimes, whatever it takes.
Yeah, we find, especially on the expeditionary side, our rangers, our SEALs, all these talking about mental health, that's a big reach, right?
Hmm.
However, they do like to talk about performance. And so I'm the type of person of like any way that we can have even just plant a few seeds and have any of these conversations because some of the data we're seeing shows that about 20% of our special forces is struggling with an eating disorder.
Yeah.
And so they're gonna, if not now, then later, they're gonna need to have a safe place to talk about this and work through it. Everybody deserves to feel safe in their body. Everybody deserves that. Whether you are a tough Navy SEAL or I don't know what the opposite of a tough Navy SEAL is, but we all deserve to feel safe in our body, and we all deserve to live a life worth living. And that means not like torturing ourselves to, you know, to meet some kind of arbitrary number sometimes. I mean, we talked a little bit about the BMI and how so much was around BMI. BMI started in the late 1800s. So, like, let's show ourselves and our bodies some grace, because we all deserve that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so if anybody on our call wanted to get involved with you all and support the work that you're doing or support similar work, how could they get involved?
So on the website that you put there, there's a get involved page.
Hmm.
And there's literally something for everybody. Whether you just share our posts on social media or you have a special skill and you're great with what we need a new website. You're great with outreach or any of the things. We have a wonderful volunteer team that does a lot of work, through volunteer. There's room on the board of directors. We just announced a board of advisors. So the board of advisors is very low commitment. It's just really making sure that in the rooms you're already in, people know about sea waves. So there's a whole variety of ways that we can get involved. If you want to donate, there's different things you can purchase. We have like a really a beautiful Neolite Beolite bracelet that's suicide prevention and eating disorder awareness, and the proceeds come back to Sea Waves. And also we're having our first gala November 7th inside the Florida Aquarium in Tampa, so it's all under the sea. And we're gonna have a really cool guest speaker there too. And so yeah, get involved, come to the gala. You can sponsor the gala, you can put an ad in the gala program, or just, use our hashtags, Neolite Be Light. Mhm.
Yeah, excellent. Um, well, uh, can I invite you to say anything else that you'd like to this group? Anything else that you'd like to leave behind?
Sure. So I just dropped our hashtag Neolite Be Light. But
Hmm.
I'd love to explain kind of like why we say it and what that
Yeah.
means. I say it with two different punctuations. I kind of say it everywhere all the time as much as I can. I don't have the tattoo yet, which on my list. So I say it with the question mark. Need a light question mark be a light. So kind of try to be the person you needed when you were in the dark more. Like,
Hmm.
so if you needed an intrusive leader, try being an intrusive leader. If you needed a mom, be a mom to somebody. You needed a sister, here, be a sister, so on. So that's with the question mark. And then we say need a light with a semicolon, be a light. And so the semicolon, we know it means your story doesn't end here. We are all going to have dark days. We all are, whether we admit it or not, whether we talk about it or not. We all have dark days. The semicolon means your story doesn't end here. So by being a light for others, and this is kind of what I did with Sea Waves, I was still very much in the dark when I started Sea Waves. Didn't know what the plan was, and I was in a dark place. But by shining a light for others, I stopped for a moment. I'm like, oh my gosh, I found my purpose. I
Mm.
can't relapse now. Like I have to shine a light for others. Like, and it kind of did that thing where it lit the light for me too. So that's why we say need a light, be a light with the semicolon. Get past that pause, try being a light for others, and you will probably find that it lights your path as well. And I saw one of our great unofficial even ambassadors, Miss Brittany Weaver, shared she works with eating disorders in the military, and she shares the hashtag, and it's starting to become a little thing. We just want everybody to kind of just share that light, and we started doing like the beacon buddy checks because the military community, we know about buddy checks. Hey, check on each other. But what happens, right? We call it, hey, how are you? Good. How are you? Good. Okay, bye. Like we don't know
Right.
what to say, and we don't know what to say when we're struggling. We don't have always have words for that. So we want to encourage people to just say like, hey, how's your light today? Are you shining bright? Are you kind of in the cloud a little? Is that cloud following you around? Is it a little bit dark? Do you need some of my light? Do you need me to call sea waves with you, or help get you to a little bit more light? I think that's an easier way to kind of check on each other.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea. And I love that need a light, be a light is just that kind of easy thing you can tuck into your back pocket for when you need it. It's easy to remember, and has a lot of different meanings. So thank you so much for sharing that. And we also just wanted to generally thank you for coming on today and sharing your passion and sharing this topic that just really isn't discussed enough. I mean, we talk about eating disorders in a general way, but really dialing into how it affects this major subcommunity in our area. I mean, North Carolina is one of the most military-friendly states in the country, and yet we're still not talking about this. So we really appreciate you bringing this topic here and for sharing your resources and sharing your experiences with us today.
Thank you. And if anybody wants to dig in for a little bit more information, this is on Amazon. And if purchasing it on Amazon is a limiting factor, reach out to me and we'll get you a PDF.
Excellent. Well, we want to thank everybody for attending today. Please note that, at least on our side, if you have any kind of mental health issues that you would like to talk about with somebody, just put our helpline information in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to us. We are here for you. Also, keep an eye out for an email by tomorrow with this video and other resources that we can provide, including all of these links that we shared. We'll have that in there for you as well, so that you can look into getting involved with Sea Waves or just checking out the Carolina Resource Center or any of these resources for eating disorders that would help you or a loved one. We're here to support in that way as well. Also, keep an eye out for our next NAMI at noon session, which will be on crisis intervention. Speaking of suicide prevention, it is Suicide Prevention Month next month. So we'll be doing kind of a deep dive into some of those topics in September. Keep an eye out for a future date. Until then, Leah, thank you so much again for giving of your time. We really appreciate having you. Um, and thank you for, again, just sharing your personal experiences with us.
Thank you. And thank you for having me and for all that you do for the North Carolina and the mental health community.
Um, and we hope that we get to work together again soon. But until then, we want to wish everybody a wonderful afternoon. Stay safe and healthy, and join us next time. Thank you.